Okay, welcome. Here we go. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm getting the stream set up. We're about to roll in. I've got a really, really awesome, really cool show for you tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the psychological aspects of believing in conspiracy theories. We've got an awesome guest. I'm going to introduce him in about, a few seconds here. I want to thank everyone for coming. Let me go ahead and do my spiel because we might do an hour show. We might go even longer. So let me go ahead and get everything out of the way now. First off, thank you to Streamlabs for sending me an awesome sweater and for being one of our sponsors here. Down below, there's a link. And if you need to record anything on your screen or you just want to record a YouTube video, it's the easiest thing in the world. And if you're going to use anything, use Streamlabs. Absolutely free. Link in the About section. And if you really like what we do here, consider Patreon, PayPal. But don't worry. We will always be going completely free, and those are completely optional sources. We'd rather have you here watching and not make sure you're saving money before you donate to anyone online. I always try to say that when I mention the pay links. So let's go ahead and get this going really quick. I wanted to thank everyone who was on my stream earlier today on the UNIRock archive. If you're not subscribed there, some of you might be asking like, hey, where are your long streams at, UNIRock? Well, I do more of the produced, edited, outlined, written streams now and interviews on UNIRocktv. I've moved the really long streams, the ones where I do Photoshop, the ones where I make graphics, the ones where we talk for hours. I do those on the archive. I still do all the member streams. All the stuff that you get from UNIRocktv is still right here. We still stream just as much as we always have. I'm just moving a couple of those long streams over to the archive. And of course, we've got a main channel. It's UNIRocktv. So let me not go any further. Let me go ahead and get our guest in here. All right. Michael, if you want to just introduce yourself and let everyone know, what you do, and we'll go ahead and roll on in.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show, Uni.
Anytime.
So I am, you want me to just give a little intro to myself, you said?
Oh, yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Yeah, cool. So I'm a psychologist. I'm an experimental psychologist. So I have my PhD in social psychology, which is a study of basically how the social environment impacts us. And then I have a master's degree in cognitive psychology, which is a study of the mind. I'm currently a university professor, an associate professor. So I'm on both sides of the process of scholarship. So I publish research myself, and I take part in reviewing other people's papers that they're trying to get published in peer-reviewed journals. So yeah, so do you want me to talk a little bit about how I got into this?
I'd love to, and I want to thank you for coming. I think we're going to have a great show. If you want to talk about how you got into this also, but make sure you let us know too, like why you're interested in, I want to know why you're interested in conspiracy theories really quick. I don't want to interrupt you, but what got you interested in this whole realm of thinking before we get going?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess as a psychologist, I find it incredibly fascinating and interesting. And one thing I think that's really interesting to think about with people who subscribe to conspiracy theories is that whether it's the Flat Earth movement or QAnon movement, that as far as I can tell, and as far as what I'm seeing, I mean, there are these are basic human needs that we all try to meet, and people meet them in very different ways. And so seeing how people in these movements and these belief systems are meeting the same needs that I meet, just in very different ways than the ways in which I meet them. So to me, as a psychologist, kind of seeing that and seeing the humanity in how people get attracted to these movements and then how they sustain their involvement in it is just completely fascinating to me. And I basically got into this by watching YouTube videos, and how they give you a stream. You have like a list of suggested videos based on what you watch. And so I watch a lot of debates on all kinds of topics. And so one day I saw, I forget which video it is because I've watched so many videos at this point, but it was a video by a flat earther, and And I said, okay, well, this is interesting. I know nothing about this movement. I hear people commenting about it here and there, and I don't know what data they have or what observations they would point to say that the Earth is definitely flat or probably flat. So I watched it, and it just, I was hooked. I started watching more and more videos by flat earthers, started watching other people's videos that are commentary on the flat earther videos, and just started taking notes and just watching as many videos as I could to try and understand, like, why is it that flat earthers believe what they do, and how do they engage in their process of inquiry. And I think that, I've also watched videos, on QAnon and 9/11 conspiracies. So I've definitely exposed myself to ideas about other conspiracies, but this is probably the one that I've exposed myself to the most and spent the most time just trying to understand how people in this in this movement think, and then how they, not only how do they think, but how do they respond to people who are critiquing them, and what does that dialogue look like when you get a flat earther and a non-flat earther in a in a debate? Like, what happens? So it's just kind of, I just jumped into that rabbit hole, and just going more deeper and deeper into, in terms of watching videos and just hashing out my thoughts on what I'm seeing and how what I'm seeing relates to what I know about the way our mind works.
Yeah, you get hooked really quick. I love debates. I watch the Non Sequitur show. They always run debates on. Do you watch them too?
Saturday night.
Great show. Wonderful show. It's excellent. Okay, I've been doing this. I've been looking at Flat Earth for a few years myself, but I never got into it really deep. And lately, for about a month or two, I've been making videos because of this weird interaction going on in the community. The thing that gets in my head, and it just sticks there, I see so much video evidence. And I've taken classes in video a little bit, and I study it now that I do YouTube. I just cannot wrap my head around how anyone could ignore all of the video evidence with just words, that, such simple words, and then prescribe such a hardcore belief to it. So after all this time of watching these videos and thinking about this, where are you at there? Like, what makes you think, why do you think people ignore such hard evidence and take such other evidence as real? Right.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there are two questions, right? There's, how do people enter into these kinds of communities? Like, how is someone persuaded? What does that look like for someone to be persuaded that the Earth is flat, it's stationary, maybe that space doesn't exist? There's some variety in terms of the beliefs that the flat Earth people in the flat Earth community have, but most flat earthers seem to believe those three things. So how does someone get persuaded that those things are true? And then once they're in the community, how do they sustain that belief in the face of all, like you said, all this video and photographic evidence? And I think it can really depend on their entry point into the community. If someone is already inclined to believe in conspiracies, and it's actually probably not that difficult, because all you have to do is show them some videos of people, so say astronauts in space, or in the International Space Station, that they take as evidence of deception, that they think there's something about the video that they can't explain and that they think points to deception. So when you do that and you say, okay, well, I can't trust NASA, and then maybe by extension, well, I can't trust SpaceX, I can't trust the Japanese government, the Russian government, the Chinese government, this international effort with the ISS, right? All these sources of these videos and pictures, well, none of them can be trusted. So that eliminates a whole bunch of evidence. Like, they're taking a whole bunch of evidence off the table that they won't even consider. And so I think that's one way that someone gets to that point. And it's because the thing is, if, for the flat Earth movement, right, if any of those pictures from space, any of the videos from space, if any of those are real, then that's it. Like, that's it for the movement. At least for the shape of the Earth. I guess they could still maybe argue, well, the Earth is stationary. It's a sphere, but it's stationary. or maybe they could still say, well, there's no space that exists because, we're just seeing something that's at the upper limits of the atmosphere. People can get very creative. I found in how they deal with information and what they do with that. But I think that for someone who is inclined to believe in conspiracies, it's probably a lot easier, I would imagine, to persuade them if they're not in the community already. I think what it comes down to is that there are kind of several entry points, like I said, and depending on how you get into the community, there are different ways you can do that. But once everyone is there, like once someone's in the community, they've now invested time and energy. They've maybe told friends and family and about their beliefs. They've maybe proclaimed their beliefs in public ways. So so they're starting to have a commitment and investment, right, in this way of viewing the world and in this identity, like in this social identity as a person in the flat Earth movement. And there also can be some really nice benefits of being in a small community. Like, for example, I don't know if you've ever watched videos of the Flat Earth conferences that they hold.
Oh yeah.
But some of the ways that the people who are the speakers at those conferences, who get up at the podium and talk to the group, they're expressing some very basic human needs. Like one person I can think of, I forget which flat earther, but he talked about not really being anyone until he became part of this community. And then he felt this sense of belonging and this sense of like, I feel like I'm someone important, being in this community. That's a basic need that we all have. Like we all want to feel like cared about. We all want to feel important. We all want to feel like we belong to a group. We know from research that ostracizing someone is very harmful. It has all kinds of negative impacts on their psychological health and on their physical health. So we are pack animals, right? Like we are social organisms, and so it feels really good to belong. And so there's that. And then some people, people like Dee Marvel and Jaron and Bob Nodell and Mark Sargent basically went, as far as I can tell from hearing their bio, they went from being just another person in this world and society, like I am, to being a superstar. Like their social status jumped up a lot, right? When they became very visible in the flat Earth community. So, and also when I hear people sometimes talk about their belief system, people in the flat Earth community, they really, it almost sounds similar to someone who is like evangelical, like an evangelical Christian, or a religious person who might say, I have the truth, and all of you don't have the truth, but I'm standing here in this place of knowing what is true, and all of you don't know what's going on. So I kind of hear that same kind of language, like we have the truth, we're not being duped, all of you are being deceived. And that can feel really good, because it feels like it kind of gives you this unique status, right? And it kind of creates a social cohesion with you and the people in your group, which just further deepens that feeling of, which can deepen that feeling of belongingness. So once someone gets into the community and they start investing their time and their identity starts being shaped in terms of being in that community, then they might work very hard to maintain that, being a member in that community and believing, not only being in the community, right? Because there are plenty of communities we can be in where we don't have to take positions about such big questions as what is the nature of the world? How does it work? What's the shape? What's this universe that we live in? How does it work? So people can sometimes be in a group where they don't have to make these big commitments, these ontological, philosophical commitments, but to be part of the flat Earth community, you do have to make these really big ontological and epistemological commitments. And so once you've invested in that, then just like any other human being who invested in a belief system, like we tend to work hard to maintain it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's how, once you get into the system, so to speak, that you might sometimes see people disregarding evidence that we think of as clear evidence for what we, for this mainstream position, but that people will find ways to discount it and dismiss it. So I'll give you an example. I was having a conversation with a flat earther in the recent past few months, and he said, well, why doesn't NASA put a moon, like a 24-hour, like a camera or video camera on the moon to provide us 24-hour stream so that we could see the Earth from the moon, and then that would be evidence? And I said, well, I don't know that you would believe that. I mean, because if you are discounting all the videos and photos that we have from space, from the Himawari satellite, that's owned by the Japanese government, by the ISS, by all this, probes and stuff we've sent up into space. If you don't believe that, why would you believe what NASA telling you that they put a camera on the moon, right? So there's an example of someone who is invested in that, he's invested in that belief system, and he is dismissing a piece of evidence, like he's asking for a piece of evidence, but then he's likely going to dismiss it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's but asking for it allows him to say, well, but they don't have that. So if they had that, I would believe, I would abandon this belief system. I would abandon these beliefs. And it's also interesting, I think, because NASA doesn't care what people believe about the shape of the Earth. Like their agenda to do what they need to do to provide evidence of a spherical Earth. Like that's probably not on the top of their list.
Definitely.
Of like what they need to do and what they're going to allocate resources towards. So.
Yeah, no, and I like what you're saying, because I know sometimes when, like, after watching the videos for a long time, I get, I forget about the human aspect, and I forget what it's like to, I don't ever consider that, is what I'm trying to say. When I'm listening to a flat earther talk, I get kind of caught up in the topic, and then I forget that maybe there are other things behind it that get people hooked in. So it's definitely something I need to consider more. It is kind of hard, though, because a lot of logical people, I know no one's going to believe me, but I want to be able to understand. If I can't believe it with them, I'd like to just understand. And I know Flat Earth is a really awkward conspiracy for me, because other conspiracies like JFK, 9/11, I can understand anyone's belief in that and those, and I even have strange beliefs about those to an extent. But then when it comes to Flat Earth or maybe QAnon and these really extreme conspiracies, I have such a hard time wrapping my head around how they can make that leap. And so, I mean, it's good to hear this, but it still doesn't, like even now, I still can't change the shape of the Earth in my head. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, I don't know if this, so maybe, because it's, I can appreciate what you're saying. It can be hard to wrap our mind around the belief system that they hold. And when I've, just jumping to QAnon for a moment, and I haven't looked at this as deeply. You know way more about this than I do. But some of the stuff I've heard with QAnon supporters in terms of the degree to which the information that they're using as evidence is ambiguous. Like,
oh yeah,
better than I do, right? They'll say things like, well, Trump is talking in code and every third letter is this letter, and he's giving us a secret message about QAnon or about the situation. They'll take essentially randomness. His words are not random, obviously, but they'll take information that in no way clearly reflects some secret message, right? And they'll twist it into evidence for something happening that they think is happening. And to me, like it just screams of what in psychology we call motivated cognition. That is that we have desires, we have motivations to, protect our self-concept, protect our self-identity, protect our beliefs, because who wants to walk around wondering if their belief system is not true? That's existentially is not viable. Like we as living organisms with a mind, we have consciousness, we have the ability to be aware not only of ourselves, output of our thoughts and feelings and sensations, right? So no one as a human being wants to walk around kind of feeling like all their beliefs are are tenuous. So we are motivated to maintain our beliefs and to have confidence, in those beliefs, and so people in the flat Earth community are no different in that way, than we are. So I don't know if that helps at all.
It definitely does. It really does. What have you been seeing lately? Like, what's really been sparking your attention? I know you've been watching debates, and I know that I've been really paying attention due to a lot of strange behavior, like people challenging. Like, it seems almost like the flat Earth community is fighting with each other. If you look into it a little bit, what have you been noticing lately that's really sparked your attention?
I think motivated cognition. I'm sorry, I totally lost my train of thought with what I was saying before. So if you don't mind me kind of coming back, and I'll relate it to the question you just asked me. So,
no problem.
Sorry. So motivated cognition. So motivated cognition is, like I said, is this idea that we work hard to, maintain a positive self-image, maintain our belief system, and I see a good amount of that, in the flat Earth community, and I'm sure I'd also see it if I looked more deeply at QAnon and other other conspiracies, and I think one way in which it came through very clearly to me and strongly was this recent fallout in the flat Earth community that you've been covering with your videos after the Behind the Curve documentary came out. Right. So right in the documentary we have, for anyone who hasn't seen it, we have Bob Nodell using a laser ring gyroscope, which is a very sophisticated piece of equipment. It's like $20,000 to buy one, and it does a very good job of measuring the Earth's rotation. And he and his peers who are conducting the study found that there was 15 degrees of rotation, 15 degree change per hour, which lines up very nicely with other ways of measuring rotation, like a Foucault pendulum, for example. And so they even put it in some kind of metal container that would block, anything that might be impacting that, that gyroscope. That would become what we call a confound, like something that could explain that change, that 15 degree change, and kind of replace or be an alternative explanation to rotation. So right, he's caught on film saying, "Oh, this is not good for the community. If we let this information out now, this is not going to be good," right? And then you have Jaron conducting an experiment. Now, the videos I've listened to about the follow-up, it sounds like maybe there were other trials of the study that Jaron did, and some of them were in line with the flat Earth, and some were in line with the globe Earth, and so maybe just is not an experiment or study that would be really good for giving us definitive proof either direction. But I mean, the stuff that Bob Nodell found was certainly very clear evidence of a rotating Earth, and so so I saw that before the fallout really started happening. I see that, and I'm like, okay, what's the community going to do with this information? This is really interesting, because if there's scenes that the documentarians didn't chose to cut in terms of what Jaron did, maybe that's true, but the flat Earth community at that point doesn't know, right? At that point, Jaron hadn't started releasing videos on his YouTube channel to kind of respond to that documentary and explain the situation. At that point, they didn't know. All they knew was that there were these video clips of flat earthers conducting studies that seemed to support, that contradicted the flat Earth belief system in terms of some of the core ideas, like rotation and a spherical Earth. So my question was, like, as a social psychologist, I'm like, ooh, this is going to be interesting to see how people respond, and they responded exactly how I thought they would, and in a way that's predicted very well by this idea of motivated cognition. So what you saw, right, as you know, is you saw a fallout. You saw people in the community, number one, rejecting, Jaron, Mark Sargent, Patricia, and Bob, And what's even more revealing, I think, is calling them shills, saying, oh, well, they must work for the CIA. They must be people who are implanted in the movement to undermine our movement. And that conspiratorial lens that you kind of need to take on to be a flat earther was turned against people in the community. So it's like they're cannibalizing, the community. Like they are, turning it against people in the community. And so when people engage in that motivated cognition game, like, looking for information, like belief confirmation, looking for information that's going to support their belief system, discounting information that doesn't, taking information that's in line with the belief system and giving it a very cursory look, and then information that's inconsistent, looking at it very deeply to find the holes and the flaws that might be there. These are all ways in which basically people create like a non-falsifiable version of their belief system. They create a belief system that's impenetrable, where it can't be penetrated by reason or logic or data. Because they can take whatever data you present to them and they can dismiss it, or they can twist it to be in evidence that's not in their belief system. They can make it in line with their belief system, and that's exactly what I saw in terms of the fallout. That people in the community said, okay, they were faced with this decision: do we take this information and do we regroup, and do we say, okay, shoot, this is not good. Like, this does not support our belief system, our beliefs about the nature of the earth. So what are we going to do? Like, maybe we should do the experiments again and try and replicate, see if we can get the same results, or see if the results are different. Let's take a look at the studies and see if there are any problems in the way the studies were set up. They could have done that, right? And that would have been a more intellectually honest route and more intellectually honest path to go. But they didn't. Instead, they chose, not that everyone in the community, but the people who are visible, like the people who, are on YouTube, they went the route of, well, let's dismiss this evidence, let's dismiss this information, which allows them to protect, their belief system, which is a great example, I would say, of motivated cognition. So I think that kind of gets, and I think that gets back to the question you asked before of like, how do people do this? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, motivated cognition, and these self-concept, these identity issues, like these are all things that are happening mostly at an unconscious level. These are not things that people necessarily are thinking about consciously and enacting. Like these are things that tend to drive us unconsciously, that we may not be even aware of, or may come through at a conscious level in very subtle ways.
That's a great point. I never even considered that maybe, I know I do some things and I think some things instantly, and I know it's kind of like my subconscious playing around, and it's definitely kind of throws me for a loop just realizing that. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, the unconscious mind is a powerful thing. I can, for example, I do this. So I teach a social psychology class, and I can get my students. So I will, and the students know that I'm doing something. I'm not, tricking them. They know that something's coming and that I'm doing something as a class demonstration. But I will, using specialized software, I can display words on a computer screen really quickly, so quickly that you don't even know you're seeing words, or you see you're seeing words on the screen, but it's so quick that you don't know what the words are. So I show them these words on the screen that have to do with aggression. And then I say, okay, now I'm going to have you read this short story about this guy named Donald. It's not supposed to be linked to Donald Trump. This was something I've been doing before Donald Trump was elected. So I probably should change the name just in case. So I show them this brief hypothetical story of this person who's kind of rude to someone who knocks on his door at his house. And then I asked them to rate Donald in terms of his personality. And I have half the class, while I'm showing those words on the screen, half the class closes their eyes so they don't see anything on the screen. Half the class looks at the screen. And what I find is that the half of the class who saw those words but didn't know what words they were seeing rate this hypothetical person as being ruder and more aggressive. And so it's like, what's happening? What's happening is that the information coming in through their eyes is being registered by their mind and unconscious level. It's what we call subliminal and what we call priming. And those words are causing these concepts of aggression to activate in their unconscious mind. And that activation is then having an impact on how they perceive this hypothetical person. But they don't know why. I mean, they don't even know what words they were seeing, so they have no idea why they might be rating him as more aggressive than someone else who didn't see the words, because that's all happening at an unconscious level. Just to give you an example of just how powerful our unconscious mind can be.
Yeah, that's definitely a good perspective. I sometimes, and I'm glad I'm talking to you because it helps me. I know that, while I see the community do this, and I know people are going to be like, well, UNIRock always makes it kind of, they think I'm kind of making fun, but really I'm just kind of like, I'm really kind of like looking at what's going on and then like just trying to express it in a kind of comedic way to deal with it, even though it may be a little bit, I don't know, maybe I've been mean at some point, but I don't like being mean. So it really helps me get a perspective to where maybe I won't in the future choose to be as condescending, I guess. So I'm glad that you helped me realize that at least.
No problem. I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead, please.
Oh, just that I think that, I mean, just like people in the flat earth community are just fellow human beings trying to, meet all of their psychological needs that you and I are meeting in, let's say, in different ways. I think it's also equally human to have that kind of response that you have to people who have this, like, a belief system that is so contrary to the way that you experience the world, and it can be right. I mean, for those of us who really do try, like you said, to kind of to take in information and evaluate things, and not just believe things uncritically or unconditionally. I mean, it can be frustrating and mind-boggling, at least to see some people. And there are some people in the community who do seem to be trying to take a rigorous and systematic approach. But then there are also just as many, if not more, people, at least from what I've seen, the things they say and the way they argue, it's mind-boggling, and it can be kind of infuriating. So I don't know if you have that experience.
Definitely. And I know one time, sometimes I get a little more, I give myself more of an excuse to maybe poke at a certain person, because there's just some people in the community that I look at and I say to myself, and I don't know, I know that sometimes it might be to like something they've done in the past or a behavior they're doing, but I'll consider that they're more conning people than they are, or more gaming people than they are really being genuine. And I think that's when I'm more likely to prod someone. But yeah, I don't, maybe it's not a good enough excuse, but still, it's interesting because one aspect of it, and I know everybody asks themselves this, is like, does this person really believe this extreme thought, the one on YouTube, right, not the viewer, but or are they just doing it because they know they can get a lot of money out of it? That goes through my head a lot.
Right, and I think that's reasonable. I mean, you saw the Behind the Curve documentary, right?
Oh yeah.
So Mark Sargent, I think it's towards the end of the documentary, they're interviewing him, and he makes it. I forget how he said it. This is paraphrasing what he said, but he made a really interesting comment, I think, about not being able to leave the community.
Yeah.
And so I almost had this feeling of that the community has become more important to him to some degree than the belief system. And is he willing to keep saying that such, A, B, and C are true if that allows him to stay in the community? Because he's built, like, he goes places and people want his autograph. And if he were to leave the flat earth community, like, that would be gone overnight. So I think I have the same thought and the same question for some people. I'm like, are you really committed to this belief system? Or are you trying to make money, like you said? Or are you just wanting to stay in the community because it feels good for whatever reason, to be in the community? And so you're, how committed are you to the actual beliefs? And I don't know. I mean, maybe when we kind of see that continuum of how hard people are working to find evidence for for the belief system. Maybe that's an indication. Maybe that's like a proxy for how committed they are. If someone's not working very hard to find evidence or to examine evidence or to examine data, are they doing it for other reasons? Maybe they're primary motivators, which can include making money. Like, didn't you have a video recently in the past week about that flat earther who was asking for donations?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Right. I definitely gave it to him a little bit.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you did, because he I feel like there's something that feels off, something that feels dishonest about what he's doing, which you seem that, from your video, it sounded like you had the same concern.
Oh, for sure. And I've been around where I live. There's a really large amount of people that do drugs, and I don't judge people for it. But then again, when I hear about Morgile saying he just got out of jail, and then he's talked about his recent drug users' problems with it, it does concern me for people that I saw the comments. There's all these people, hey, what do you need? I'll send it. And it's just a little concerning to an extent. And that's why I added that in for sure.
Right. Well, it's, yeah. When you have a very well-knit small community, people's sense of responsibility for each other is probably going to be more intense.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going to be easier for people who are disingenuous to get support, to get support and to be opportunistic in terms of other people's generosity or vulnerability. So I think it's a reasonable concern. And just with, technology is a wonderful thing, and it connects us, but it also, I think it creates more vulnerability. At the same time that it connects us and it enriches our lives. It can enrich our lives in some amazing ways, for sure.
Yeah, and just to say this, I have no problem with him doing good content and making $1 million. It's just there becomes that one point where you say to like I said earlier, where you say to yourself, what's really going on behind the scenes. But so far you've really this thing about I think, let me go back one tab here. Motivated cognition. That's something I've never considered. Is there any deeper you can go into that, or what, without probing you too much there? Or what?
Yeah, no, it's fine. Well, one way that it could be, which we could go a little deeper in motivated cognition, is by considering some of the research that's been done on conspiratorial thinking. You mind if I launch into that?
Oh, go ahead. Yes, please.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess a few caveats about this research. So one thing I guess to say is that research looks at aggregate level data, meaning patterns across many, many people, hundreds of people, thousands of people. So any of the research that we have on conspiratorial thinking is not something that we can necessarily apply to any one individual who believes in conspiracies. And it's probably not likely that everything we found is going to relate to every individual. And so that's one caveat. But these are scientific studies that have been vetted by the community. They've ended up published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, which means that they've gone through a vetting process of, the action editor of the journal receiving the manuscript that the authors want to publish. The action editor sends it out to, 2 to 4 scholars in the same area of research who are not going to be involved in that project, who criticize that project and find all the holes and problems, which us, social scientists and scientists love doing with each other's work, because when I get a manuscript for review from a journal, I have no vested interest in that manuscript getting published. Like, I don't care if the manuscript gets published, in the sense it's not going to help my career out. So I have every reason to to point out to the action editor any problems that exist with that article. And I'm saying that just to help your listeners, anyone who's not familiar with how things get
I'm glad
published.
you are. I'm glad you're saying
Cool.
it. It's good, and I think I do that myself a little with other YouTubers, so it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're a part of the YouTube community. You're providing a quality control mechanism, right? And that's what we have to do. I mean, this has to be a collective effort. And one of the reasons it has to be a collective effort, I would say, is because we all have our own biases and we all engage in motivated cognition. So we can't, as individuals, pull this off. We need each other because I can see your blind spots in a way that you can't, and vice versa. So science is a collective effort and it has to be. And so one way which it is a collective effort through this quality control process that we have in place. So these are all studies that have been vetted by people who know a lot about this research area to begin with, and are trained scientists. So that's one caveat, is just about how we understand how to apply this. The other caveat is this doesn't necessarily, just because someone believes in some conspiracies doesn't mean that all this or any of this would necessarily apply to the person. I suspect that my reading of these studies is really more that it applies to that mindset of kind of experiencing the world with that lens in general, versus someone who's like, well, we know that a government has done things that are shady, and then it comes out decades later or years later. And so if someone presents information to me that gives me good reason to believe that there's something sketchy happening, then I'm going to, form a belief based on that, information. So I guess I also want to put that caveat out there that this is not necessarily something that we can think of as applying to anyone who believes in any conspiracy, any conspiracies that are happening. So let's see. So there are two groups of studies kinds of research that have been done with conspiratorial thinking. So one is what we call correlational studies. So basically you give people a survey and ask them a bunch of questions about their beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors. And then you see the degree to which responses on different measures kind of line up with each other, like whether they correlate with each other. And when we look at those kinds of studies for conspiratorial thinking, we find that the more people endorse believing in conspiracy theories, the more they report wanting to feel special, the higher trait anxiety they report, the more they tend to believe that society is under threat. Not surprisingly, they tend to be more likely to reject science, to lack trust in authority. They tend to be more likely to believe that there's purpose in the universe, or what we call teleological thinking. They're more likely to be kind of focus or rely more on their intuition than analytical thinking. And they tend to overestimate the depth of their understanding of kind of complex relationships. And they tend to, if you give them information that's kind of random, like you show them shapes moving on a computer screen that are created in a way that they're moving randomly, that they will see agency, like they will see purpose and intentionality behind the movement of those shapes, even if we know for sure that there is no intentionality and no agency behind those shapes. I mean, there is in the sense that some human being who's conscious intentionally programmed, created the software and did the coding that would allow them to make their shapes move. But the actual movement of the shapes, there is, it's random. Or to just even perceive causal relationships and non-connected events, what we call spurious correlation. So you say, as this goes up, this also goes up. And like, oh, see, there's a causal connection. So, A causes B when maybe A is only related to B because, C causes A and C causes B. So because A and B are both related to some other variable, they both change in the same direction, but not because they're actually impacting each other. So, and also interestingly, when there's some kind of anxiety-provoking societal event that occurs, you tend to see a rise in conspiracy theories. Like you tend to see more conspiracy theories arising, and they tend to gain more momentum. So this kind of allows us to have. And also, I don't think I mentioned this. The more people believe in conspiratorial theories, the more they have what we call an external locus of control, meaning they tend to believe that the things that happen to them in their life are outside of their control. it's because of things happening out there in the world. So we have, versus an internal locus of control is more like I create the outcomes in my life. And then you can have a mix, right, of like, well, these things I can create and these things are out of my control. Right. So I get to decide how defensively I drive, but that's more of an internal locus of control. But I don't get to decide how other people drive, right? That's more of an external locus of control. So, so here we have kind of a psychological profile, if you will, right, of people who tend to believe in, in conspiracy theories, tend to have that conspiratorial lens. So, if we look at some of these, right? So, for example, external locus of control. I find that to be really interesting. So, if someone believes that things that happen to them in their life are outside their control, that's going to create this need to gain control, to gain a sense of control, a perception of control, because we also know that having external locus of control is related to depression and helplessness. I mean, it doesn't feel good, right, to feel like things are out of control in our life, like the outcomes in our life are not things that we have control over, that we have to just kind of give up. We just kind of have to sit back and just wait to see what happens, whether things get better or they stay good. So I think that is one area where, for example, motivated cognition can come into play, because then when you look at, before I say more, did you have any questions or thoughts about that, what I said?
Not really. I mean, I definitely, so much is going through my mind. Just, keep going, and we'll hash it out later, because I'm following you perfectly right now.
Awesome. So in another set of studies that have been done are what we call experimental studies. So we're talking about studies in a research lab. Correlational studies, you're throwing out a bunch of measures to people, having them respond to the measures, seeing if there are any, seeing if people's responses are connected to each other on these different measures. In experimental studies, we're bringing people into a lab. We have more control over the conditions, and we can create specific conditions and then see how those conditions shape people's behavior. So we can talk about causality, whereas when we look at a survey study that's just correlational, we can't talk about causality because it's not the right kind of information to form conclusions about causal relationships, like A causing B, A leading to B. So these experimental studies, really interestingly, when you take people and you randomly assign them to be in a condition, for example, in which you induce a feeling of lost control. So you put them in a state of mind in which they feel like they have less control over what's happening in their life, right? And then you have another group of people who don't have that happen. Like they maybe do some other activity that's not giving them that same feeling of lost control. And then you see what happens. Like, how do the people who are feeling like they have some lost control, how do they behave differently, or do they behave differently than the people who are not having that feeling? And what you find is that when people, and these are people just pulled from the general public, the general population, who don't necessarily, who are not going to fit into that kind of the group of people who are consider themselves to be conspiracy theorists. But when you get people who don't believe in conspiracy necessarily to experience this loss of control, you find that they're more likely to endorse conspiracy theories. They're more likely to endorse superstitions. And I'm not saying that to say that superstitions aren't, true or real. They're more likely to detect agency or patterns in random information, like seeing images and random noise, or seeing patterns in random stock market information. They're also more likely to perceive their enemies as having more of an impact on them. And kind of similarly, when you put people in a state of uncertainty by putting them in like an emotional state like worry, anxiety, fear, these are emotions about uncertainty, something not being resolved. They show similar patterns. They endorse conspiracy theories to a great degree. They endorse the existence of the paranormal, and they perceive agency where agency doesn't exist. So to kind of link this back to the locus of control, I think that what we're seeing through these correlational studies and the experimental lab studies is that for some people, I'm not going to say this applies to everyone who believes in conspiracies, but for some people, I suspect the conspiracy theories, that way of viewing the world, is a way to gain back control. Right? It's a way to feel like they have a handle on what's happening in their life and what's happening around them, right? And conspiracy theories can do a really good job of doing that, because conspiracy theories often give us, information about people who are doing things that are secretive. So we get to know these things that people, even if we don't know who the they is, we still know that there are these group of people doing things in secret, and we know that they're there, and we know that that they're doing it, and we know what they're doing, and we know, at least most of what they're doing. And we know the impact of what they're doing, and we know how we might feel like we know how it impacts our life in some ways. And so we can do something about that, right? We can take steps to kind of gain back a certain sense of control. We can also kind of gain back a certain amount of certainty, like feeling like we understand what's happening, and we're not hanging out in that space of ambiguity and uncertainty that none of us like. I mean, we are wired to reduce uncertainty and to reduce ambiguity. And not that, some of us can handle in some areas better than others, but we all have those areas of our life where we don't like ambiguity and we don't like uncertainty, and then you pair that. I would pair that with things like overestimating depth of knowledge, right? So, you take someone has that, maybe has a feeling at an unconscious level of not understanding, not having control, having uncertainty. And one way to reduce all that is to feel like, oh, I understand these really complex causal relationships, these really complex things happening in my world. Because, but you have people who have either, like, on the side, when they're not fulfilling their, like, maybe family obligations or work obligations, doing research online, doing research on YouTube, and feeling like they've come to the same level of understanding as a physicist, or as a mathematician.
That drives me crazy sometimes.
Right. I mean, I guess the way I would say it to someone who kind of has that perception of themselves is it takes we're talking about very complex topics, and our world, like the reality never guaranteed us that we would understand it at a deep level. Like, there's no guarantee that we will understand how everything works in reality, or even how most things work, or even a good section of things work. So, now, obviously, we have a pretty good handle on things if we can build bridges and buildings and do all the kind of things with technology, but there are lots of things that we still don't understand. And so for someone to spend that kind of time and think that they are getting the same quality of understanding as someone who's gone through years and years of intense study, and I know what that's like. I spent 7 years in graduate school in addition to 4 years in college, and during the 7 years in graduate school, I devoted my life to the study of social psychology and cognitive psychology. I would spend probably 60 to 70 hours a week.
Oh, yeah.
Doing what I did for 7 years straight. I take a week off here and there to go visit my family, but no more than a week at a time. And even during that week, I was probably doing some work at some point. So that's what it takes. And it not only does it take time, but it takes, you need to have a quality control process in place. You need to have someone, there needs to be oversight. So my advisor was there the whole time to make sure that I corrected any mistakes that I made. And I did, misunderstandings, and I left out information, didn't take information into account, made mistakes. And that was all corrected through that mentorship process. So it's not that someone has to go get their PhD in physics necessarily to come to the same level of understanding, but if they're not going to get their PhD, they sure have to devote, they have to win the lottery and devote their life to the study of that, or do whatever they have to do, but they can't just do it on the side, or even there are people like, I don't know, people like Sharon and Mark Sargent have gotten to the point where they make enough money from the YouTube channel that they can just devote their life to this, and that's, if they can, that's great. Okay. But even so, if they've only been doing that for a few years, that's not going to match the level of understanding that someone has from going through grad school. And as far as I can tell, they're not talking to physicists to make sure that their understanding is correct. And so they're basically, as far as I can tell, checking their understanding with each other.
Yeah.
So you get a whole bunch of people who don't have who either have a misunderstanding or an incomplete understanding, vetting each other, and that's not gonna work. It's not going to allow them to make sure that they have the level of understanding that they need to understand some of these very complex topics. So just as one example, I'm sure you've heard flat earthers, they love to use the Michelson and Morley study. Have you heard about that? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Are you familiar? Okay. So
I'm not really familiar with the whole thing. I know the basics though.
So I mean, right? They love to say, well, that study proved the Earth is stationary. But I mean, since I work at a university, I have access to mathematicians and physicists. So I've had like an ongoing consultation going on with an astrophysicist around, the ideas that are relevant to the flat Earth, Earth-shaped debate. And we've talked about the Michelson-Morley study, and it turns out, well, it's just not true that study proves the Earth is stationary. It only proves the Earth is stationary if the ether exists. So there are two possibilities. Either one, the ether exists and the Earth is not moving, so therefore the ether is not impacting. It wasn't impacting the light beam. Or number two, the Earth is moving and there's no ether. In which case you would still. So those are two situations that would create the same result that they found. So there are two factors at work, and so you have to eliminate one factor to be able to focus on the other factor and isolate that. So, but that's someone who's just kind of going on Wikipedia or going online and reading something about that experiment might not come out of that with the understanding that, you need to assume the ether exists to conclude that the experiment proves the Earth is stationary. But talking to a physicist is a great way, right? To kind of vet my understanding of that, to say, okay, this is what people are saying about this study, the results, the meaning. What are the implications of this? And like talk it through with that person, and kind of figure out what is the actual, correct, accurate conclusion. And I see that happening again and again. So, again, not investigating at the level of depth that someone really needs to, and not vetting their understanding with people who are experts and who have spent decades devoting their life to the study of this little slice of reality could easily, lead to someone to overestimate their depth of understanding.
Yeah, right? And also, not to interrupt you, but one thing I've noticed is that when they do this, they get a lot of response from their comments or in their live chat, and everyone's like having a eureka moment, like, oh, that makes sense. But with the fundamental misunderstanding, it's like, how many other people are going to go and then base their own view of everything off of this bad concept? It's a little scary, honestly.
It is. I agree. I mean, it's scary. It's a very problematic process of inquiry. And I think that it just speaks again to the motivated cognition idea and I've caught myself doing this. I mean, we all engage in it. So I think the trick is trying to be aware of when we are kind of starting to fall into that place of engaging in motivated cognition. So, when they're doing what you describe, right, they're seeing someone express this, this idea, and they're like, oh, that sounds, wow, that's really insightful. And how deeply do they investigate that to make sure that what the person's saying is correct, versus the moment that they see something that's inconsistent with the belief system, they are analyzing that with, vigor and putting a lot of energy into that. And so that's one way in which motivated cognition can manifest is, we put more energy and time into investigating the information that's inconsistent with our beliefs, and we put less energy and time for the things that are consistent, right? And it's a way to protect our belief system. It's a way to maintain that feeling of certainty, and it's a way to maintain that feeling of control, in our life. Because again, these desires for control and certainty and reducing ambiguity, they're not things that tend to happen at a conscious level. Right. And so it's that motivated cognition, at work. I mean, it's, and that, I guess, going back to your first question for me, how did I get into this? This is like a gold mine for a social psychologist.
Yeah.
because there are so many illustrations. And I just want to again reiterate that it's not that flat earthers and other conspiracy theorists are embodying these psychological tendencies that are special or unique to those groups. Like we all show these tendencies. And so but I'm finding that people in the flat earth community, it's particularly salient.
Yeah.
The way in which
do you think anyone can fall into believing in something like this because of that, because of how it's such a natural thing for us to do?
I do. I think that anyone, I really do think that anyone can. I mean, social psychology has shown us, among other things, that situations are powerful, and we are all capable of many things, given the right circumstances. So, if someone is experiencing things in their life that kind of leave them in a place of feeling out of control and feeling really uncertain, this could be something that comes along in that moment that is really appealing to them. So yes, I think that we're all, we're all, it's possible that any of us could fall into these kind of belief systems. And I think the key is to be aware. I mean, for example, I'm a meditation practitioner. I've been meditating for 16 years, and my meditation practice goes hand in hand with my work as a psychologist in terms of my work with myself, in the sense that cultivating a deeper level of awareness has helped me see these things I teach about in class and I do research on, seeing them kind of happen within myself and catching myself doing these things. And I think that there are people who are, there's a continuum of how likely we are to fall into it. And I think where we are in that continuum depends on, personality characteristics, styles of thinking, feeling, interacting with the world, and the things that we experience. Like someone who really wants to feel special is not, maybe has high levels of anxiety, feels like their life is out of control, and maybe more likely to adopt that kind of belief system than someone who is not in that same situation. And I think also one thing that seems to be highly related to the flat earth belief system, which I'm sure you've seen this illustrated again and again. And so let me step away from that for a moment. So there was a poll I found online, and I don't know how much to trust this poll, because there's so many trolls, right, in this in this debate. It can be hard to know how accurate a survey is. But a survey I found online, which was conducted by an agency outside of the community, it wasn't conducted by someone in the community, found that 52% of people in the community identify as religious. And I would assume that most of those people identify as Christian, because I'm sure you've seen, and this, and me saying this is not a critique of being spiritual religious, because I consider myself to be spiritual. So, it's not critiquing like believing in something bigger than oneself. But, so I would imagine that most of those people identify as Christian, just because Christianity is the majority religion, right, in the United States. I believe so, right? I think there are more Christians than Jews and Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, etc. And so, to me, that's really interesting, because often I'll hear flat earthers in the end bringing their argument back to this idea that, this triad, a rotating Earth hurling through space in this huge universe that is expanding, Big Bang Theory. And, we emerged from single-celled organism, which emerged from this kind of soup of material. I mean, I'm not a biologist, so I couldn't give you a better description than that. But right, so okay, cool. So to some people, those three ideas lead them to feel like their existence is meaningless. And so contrast that to like, oh, I live on this flat stationary plane, and everything literally revolves around me, around us as a species. And we're the only thing that seems to be that seems to be flat, and we're the only thing that seems to be stationary, and everything else seems to be moving around us. I mean, that's pretty darn special, right? I mean, that is the kind of situation that can very easily lead someone to feel special. So even if someone doesn't believe in like the Christian God, Jewish God, or Muslim God, and they're spiritual, they may still find a sense of meaning, in their existence, which, again, going back to these basic needs, we all want to feel meaning. And maybe for some people, the idea of going like down the existential route of like being our own meaning creators, and life is inherently meaningless and existence is inherently meaningless, and it's up to us to create meaning. I mean, for some people, that can be really scary, intimidating, anxiety provoking. And so having that belief of, wow, like there's a special place in existence for me and for, all these other humans that are on this earth. So, I've heard some people who are Christians, and they'll interpret the Old Testament to say that the earth is flat, and then they'll, try and gain support for that. And then some people who seem to, maybe they're religious, spiritual, and then they find this community, and once they start learning about it, they're like, oh, well, this makes sense, because this is kind of in line with my belief that like God created this special place for us, in the universe. So people who are religious and maybe think about their existence in that way, I would say are also like maybe more inclined to move into this community.
I was just talking about this 2 nights ago, or last night. And I was talking about how, I was an atheist for a really long time. I wasn't spiritual at all. And I ended up, realizing that from my own perspective, I now believe in the opposite. But so it's really, I have this really unique perspective. I can identify with atheists, I can identify with Christians, and everyone in between. But I noticed that it always seems like it's cheap to me, and I'm not insulting anything. I don't want to insult anyone's belief, but it seems like it almost takes away, because when I went from atheist to Christian, I had to I went through like, getting married and having a baby, and I was deployed to Iraq, and all these crazy things in my life happened. And it wasn't because of those things, but it was because of there are a lot of powerful things happening and a lot of realizations that I would have never had if I was just assured 100% that the earth is flat underneath me. It's like I feel like maybe I wouldn't have went through so much of a journey realizing everything if it would have just been that way from the beginning. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, it does. I mean, I guess you feel like there was a certain amount of struggle and adversity you went through, but that's been a source of growth, that you wouldn't necessarily want to take that away from yourself and not have that growth. Is that?
Yeah, you're right on it. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I guess I haven't thought about that in terms of can it be an easier path? I mean, I guess maybe I would imagine it goes back to some of the stuff we've already talked about, that, if someone who's maybe a little anxious or really anxious, or someone who just kind of has a tough time. I mean, there's this great measure in psychology. It's called ambiguity tolerance. Basically measures like how well people can tolerate ambiguity, and this is what we call an individual difference variable. So people differ. So some people are really good and really tolerant of ambiguity. Other people have a really tough time with ambiguity, and they do what they can to minimize that. They kind of get closure. And so maybe people who are like you, maybe you're someone who's lower on the need for closure and higher on the ambiguity tolerance spectrum.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so you're able, like for you, it maybe even feel like a positive thing to some degree, or at least afterwards you're like, well, I'm glad I went through that period, because I really am a different and better person, because of that. Whereas some people might encounter the ambiguity and just be like, oh, I can't deal with this. Like, this is too hard. Like, there's too much anxiety here. So for those people, maybe that path would be like, oh, whew, this is nice. I don't have to like wrestle and really struggle with ambiguity. Whereas I'm like you, like, bring it on. Yeah. Bring on the ambiguity. If that's what I need, in my life to kind of learn what I need to learn, then okay, I'll be there. Like I'm not gonna necessarily like it, but I will be in the messiness,
Mm-hmm.
you know, of life if that's what I need. If that's what needs to happen for me to learn what I need to learn. But but not everyone is able to do that, at least in a given moment in their life.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%.
So I'm curious, how do you because in my reflection on this, on the flat earth movement, I mean, I've thought about, I'm spiritual, like I said, it sounds like you are as well. And so, I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out when it comes to, is there a divine presence and what's the nature of that divine presence, and those kinds of questions.
Oh yeah.
But I don't feel like I need a divine presence, spirit, whatever, to exist to feel like my life has meaning. And I certainly, the degree to which I feel like my existence has meaning, to me, is not at all connected to, whether macroevolution, was the process by which I was able to come into existence, at least in terms of my physical body. And I don't care whether the Earth is a sphere or a trapezoid or a disc. Like, it doesn't really matter to me what the shape of the Earth is in terms of how I experience my meaning. It doesn't matter to me whether we revolve around everything or everything revolves around us, or both are true simultaneously. I mean, my understanding of the universe is that physics says that everything's expanding, so there's no center. Like, everything is the center and not the center simultaneously. And everything's revolving around everything else. So we are moving around the sun, but that's only when the sun is stationary relative to us, but the sun is moving relative to something else. Like, velocity is always relative. So, but to me, it doesn't, whether we're revolving around the sun and the sun is revolving around everything else, or the reverse, to me, that has no bearing on my feeling of meaning. So I'm just curious for you, what your process is, or what your experiences are on that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, because the way I look at it, and it took me a while to get here, but I look at whatever we're experiencing here, none of us chose to be here. We're all just kind of confused and figuring this out. And I feel like it's more of, like I was saying, a journey, and we all go through these different, I don't want to say awakenings, or we go through these different realizations that seem to be necessary for people to grow or to advance further in their ability to deal with life, or just be okay with being here. So yeah, I'm with you. I feel like science, in my opinion, it's really weird, because I actually became spiritual because of science and looking at DNA, looking at evolution, which was really crazy for me. But I feel like they're two separate things, and that and to me it makes perfect sense. We are it. Like I said, I didn't used to believe I'm a spiritual being, or that I have a soul, but now I completely do, and it seems completely obvious that we are a soul, and that's okay. But also, the physical world being what we see the physical world being is also a very necessary thing, in my opinion. So to me, they're two separate things.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely resonate with what you're saying. I mean, I and I'm not the first person to say this, of course, but I think that science just brings out the majesty and beauty and richness and awesomeness of this existence that we live in, that was created in whatever way it was created, and whomever is behind it. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I almost feel like people who reject science are missing out.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
On something really awesome, like DNA. Like you talked about DNA. I mean, how crazy is it that there are these organic pieces of information, that exist, that are in our bodies, and I guess every cell, right? Every cell in our blood, and have the basic building blocks and the instructions for life. To me, that is amazing. The fact that a baby can grow, a human being can grow in a woman's womb, that's awesome.
Oh yeah.
So I'm with you. I'm like, science has only increased my awe with whatever is responsible for all this.
Yeah, and I downloaded this new, it's completely free program. It's called Space Engine, and you can just download it and literally go to any star, go to any galaxy, and it's basically just a representation of what we see, but it may not be completely accurate, but it's so cool to fly around in it. And I was playing with it the other day, and I'm thinking, wait, there's a big number of people that wouldn't even get any value out of this really cool program that somehow uses algorithms to generate what the universe looks like. And I was kind of sad for a second. I'm like, it's so pretty and it's so crazy to see this, but people don't even, grasp it because of these thoughts. So I had to reckon with that for a few minutes.
Yeah, I bet. Well, it is sad, and I'm actually at the website right now. I'm going to download this. That sounds awesome.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Cool.
I'm going to do a tutorial on it. I'm going to do one in the next few days. It's a little weird at first to get used to, but
that's a good idea. Well, I'll download it after we finish the conversation. I'm going to download it, and I'm going to wait for your tutorial.
Awesome.
So I can use it. So yeah, thank you in advance for doing that. Tutorial.
I just found it too. Okay, so let's do this. Let's take a 30-second break, or maybe a minute. I'm just going to grab a drink. You can grab what you'd like, and then I'll tell the audience what we're doing and what we're talking about. And I'd like to kind of go in. Everything you said makes great sense, and I've never read about motivated cognition, and I'm going to make sure I study it just a little bit and get up to date on it. And then I'd like to go into a little more focus on maybe the conspiracy theories, some different ones. And I'd like it, before we finish, one thing I want to know is maybe what is knowing everything you know about the way we think about conspiracies. I'd like, when we get back, to talk about how we can help people maybe understand that this thing that we've discussed for this hour and a half, that there maybe are other reasons they believe what they believe, and just maybe I could help them realize that with a video or something. So we'll talk about that when we get back here. So
sounds good.
Okay. All right, guys. I'm going to mute you for just a minute, my friend. It won't be for long. All right. I'm just going to play some music and switch to the front screen. Don't go anywhere. We're going to continue our conversation. It's been a great conversation. I hope you find some value in it. And anyway, before I keep going, I'm just going to go ahead and get the break started. Grab you a smoke and a pancake, or a pipe and a crepe, or whatever you need. So you got about 30 seconds or a minute, and we'll be right back into it right here on UNIRock Live. Okay. Okay, Matthew, just unmuted you, and we're talking to Mathew Hunsinger. Did I say your last name all right? I want to make sure I'm not messing it up.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Are we live again?
Yeah, we're back on.
Okay, cool.
We're talking with Matthew. We're just kind of going on understanding a few little things about, conspiracy theories that I know just thinking about the things that I don't think about when I'm making my videos. And I'm a little bit funny with my videos, so I can get mean. So it's really it's really nice to sit down and talk to someone and realize that, as much as there are two things. I want to talk about what I said and kind of like figure out more on maybe into specific conspiracies and helping people realize what we just talked about. But then again, also, before we end out, I do want to speak on something that I'm very interested in that I started to stream on this channel for, which is once you maybe the desires or motivations or characterizations of a person that is doing I don't want to say, well, I'll say it, maybe understanding why there are people out there who see a conspiracy community and then are willing to maybe pretend or lie and try to jump in it for monetary gain or for their own personal selfish reasons. So I wanted to go there a little bit too sometime if possible. Sure. Yeah.
Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump there now, because that's my thing. Like so let me say this really quick. So when I started over here, I didn't know what I was going to discover about Q or QAnon. And I found a lot of data, and I presented it to the whole community that there are a few people responsible for posting these posts, and I had some pretty solid evidence for why I believed it. So really, if I'm correct, and a lot of people agree with me, there's still some people that don't, obviously, but that would mean that there are about 5 to 8 people who are on a message board putting out this air of secret government leaker, secret information, and then they're running over to YouTube so that they can present content with what they've created to make some money and to have some easy stuff to do. And my channel's been trying to, find what's really behind some of these topics, but also I have a hard time wrestling with how someone does that to another person. Maybe it's like, if you aren't a person who typically takes advantage of others, then it'd be like a foreign thought, kind of a foreign concept. And I always wrestle with how they can sleep at night, or why their conscience isn't working, or what's going on in their heads. So what do you think about maybe someone who is lying and presenting it for money?
Right. So, I still have trouble, I think, wrapping my mind around, kind of like you do, understanding the kind of mentality that would allow someone to treat others in that way. I know that when people are desperate, they may behave in ways that they wouldn't normally behave in, and they may do things that are kind of a violation of their internal, moral compass. But then there are those people, I think, the group of people you're talking about are people who either don't seem to have that compass, or their compass is very different than ours, and they're willing to achieve their goals and get their needs met, even if it's at the expense of others. And so I think, to me, that's like the common thread, is that there are a group of people in this world who are willing to exploit others to get their own needs met and to meet their own goals. And I think I suspect there are probably a whole bunch of reasons why people end up in that place. I'm a social psychologist, so I'm definitely more focused on the impact of the social environment than genes and biology. So my bias is towards trying to understand why we behave the way we do in terms of our social environment. So I don't know the degree to which genes would have an impact on, could or does have an impact on people who act in the way, these people who you're describing. But I would imagine that the social environment is going to have at least as much, if not more, of an impact in terms of, what was their upbringing like? Like, what kind of family did they grow up in? What kind of behavioral modeling did they get from their parents, from their caregivers, from their family, and how did that upbringing and how did their experiences in life kind of interact with their kind of personality, the aspects of what they brought into this world. But yeah, I mean, I have a tough time, along with you, of understanding why people treat each other in that way, because it's a very different way of being in the world than I am, and that I would want to be. And people who, for example, people who are psychopaths, and I'm not saying that the people you're describing are psychopaths.
No, but I'm glad you said that. I was going to specifically ask you about sociopaths, psychopaths, so I'm glad you went there.
Yeah, so it's I mean, from a clinical perspective, psychopaths are people who can have very good interpersonal skills, can be very charming interpersonally, but tend to be very manipulative. And so there's even been some interesting, and this is not my area of expertise, so I'm kind of limited in my knowledge of this area, but I do know that I think there's research finding, for example, that people who are psychopaths are not able to read facial expressions as well for like emotional cues. So like they might not recognize fear as easily or as quickly as we do. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, well, they don't know they're hurting people because they can't see the fear. Well, that might not be the case. It might be the case, for example, that someone who doesn't experience those emotional cues as easily and as well, it might make it easier to hurt others because they're not seeing the suffering in a way that it's not as salient to them as it would be for us, for example, like someone who's able to read those cues. Because I would say that even though we're wired to have the capacity to be aggressive and to hurt each other, I'd say that we're also just as much wired to empathize with others and to do what we can to maintain social relationships and to maintain harmony, in the collective. And there's research, for example, if you look at like diaries from the Civil War, that soldiers would purposely sometimes aim above the heads of people on the other side. They didn't want to necessarily kill the people on the other side. And, I mean, there's probably a lot of factors that went into that, because maybe it's like it could have been a family member, right, that they're supposed to kill or trying to kill. But we do see, I mean, there's actually there are these neurons in the brain called mirror neurons that basically fire, they activate, and it doesn't matter whether or not you're doing the action or watching someone else do the action. Like, these neurons do not distinguish between, they don't discern between the agent, like in terms of whether I'm doing it. So some people have said that these mirror neurons are maybe part of the system that allows us to be empathic, to kind of experience empathy towards others. So we're just as much wired for that system. And so that system may not be as active for someone, for example, who is not able to like experience other people's negative emotions with as much salience as the rest of us. So I'm sure, I mean, I don't know all the criteria that go into categorizing someone as a psychopath or sociopath. But some of these people may be psychopaths in the sense that they will do what they have to do to get what they want. And even if that means, hurting others in the process. Yeah.
I'm with you. I mean, it's YouTube is so weird. It has to be like a treasure trove of data for you in your field, because I mean, you could watch any number of communities and get any number of data at any time. I mean, I don't know how, I do the same thing though. I mean, I'm clicking around and I just see video after video and I'm thinking, oh, that'd be a great video to comment on. But you also have that. What are some of the stuff you've seen on YouTube that really, boggled your mind? I mean, I know you talked about Flat Earth and you've said some things about Q. Are there any other communities that have really interested you or piqued your attention?
My interest? Let's see. I think those two, and one thing I've only watched one or two videos on a Non Sequitur show, the incel community.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's something that is interesting, I think, because and I one non sequitur show, they actually, I think, I don't know who this person was, but I think this person was someone who was involved in that community early on, and just he kind of talked about the history of the community, and it was really interesting for me to hear, and just to really hear how what the community is today sounds like it's very different than what it started out as, and just the composition of the community today is very different. There's seems to be just an interesting mix today of people who have very different views of, for example, women, and very different views of whether I don't know, like whether what's the appropriate way to respond behaviorally. So that's something that's been interesting to me, because again, like as a psychologist, like I can't help but see, like, one of the first questions that usually comes up for me is like, what is the need? Like, what needs is this person meeting by being in this community, and what needs are not being met? And that's in no way like it's not condoning any behavior that's unethical, illegal, inappropriate, harmful, etc. But that's where I tend to go. So I'm like, okay, these people in this incel community, like what are the needs in their life that are not being met, and how is this community, if not helping them to meet those needs, at least giving them a space to talk about the frustration that comes along with not meeting those needs.
Do you think that a lot of these communities that you've kind of observed, do you see that as a commonality, that a lot of maybe I know that a lot of people will talk on their home lives, family lives, or what they their backgrounds while they're streaming and stuff. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, would a certain personality be more likely to believe in flat Earth solely because for non-factual reasons? Because that, I think, would I think that'll help me understand a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think for any of these communities, I mean, I think that we, as a species, like, we join the communities that are nourishing to us, right? For whatever reason. I mean, for example, I enjoy this process I go through of kind of observing and reflecting and learning about human beings, learning about myself, wanting to talk about my observations and my thoughts, wanting to hear about other people's experiences and perspectives, right? So I find this process nourishing for those reasons. So we all enter into the communities that help us feel nourished and give us outlets for finding meaning in our life. And what we join depends on what needs that we're focused on and what we find meaningful. So I think that is a common thread across all these communities. And then the question,
it makes sense.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it makes sense because we've noticed that the Q community took a very big downturn. It became less popular, and it's weird because the people that are left really devoted to that community, you can look at over to Flat Earth and then see a lot of parallels. You see a lot of commonalities between, because both those communities are older communities now. They're not in their trend or their prime, and the people that are left are really quick to defend, to illogically defend what they're believing in. So, I mean, I guess that is a really good perspective there, and it kind of feels kind of mean then if you're trying to wake someone up to Flat Earth, but really, are we trying to wake them up that their community's bad? That question kind of bothers me if I think about it like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, let's see. That's a good question. I mean, I guess if so you're talking about, you're asking a question about, are we alerting them to the people in their community who are basically taking advantage of them, or could be taking advantage of them?
More from the aspect of like the people who are left believing in the Q thing, they really don't even care for facts now. It's just they're in it because they go,
they're committed.
They pull that Mark Sargent move, like, hey, even if President Trump came out and said that Q isn't real, you know, that's just part of the plan. If he would do that, and you know, they would keep believing. And then we've got on the side of Flat Earth, Mark Sargent, and a lot of the people that follow them still kind of mimicking that same thing. So I think it makes a lot of sense that, you know, it would suck to destroy a community. It's just a bunch of people hanging out together. Who wants to do that, you know?
Right. I mean, I guess the thing is, are they, I guess, could someone, you know, someone could become so entrenched and so invested in the community that they, like when you just described what you did about the QAnon, the main community, to me, that suggests that they're in it so much. They're committed. They've committed themselves to it to such a degree that they are basically working with a non-falsifiable version of the belief system, right? So that anything you give them, they will find a way to dismiss it or to turn it into evidence. Like evidence against, they'll turn in evidence for. And so they could be so invested and that they don't even like they can't even see themselves in terms of their own thought process, like their own reasoning and process. They might not even see it anymore because they're so entrenched, you know, in it that it becomes like transparent to them. And I think that that's probably different than someone who maybe at some level like understands like this doesn't really hold water, but I'm gonna stay in it because I like it too much. Like, and I just, you know, this is not exactly the same situation, but like I remember growing up, I grew up in a Lutheran church. I don't identify as Christian now. I grew up in a Lutheran church, and I never felt strongly. I never had a strong faith, but I loved youth group. Like we went to baseball games and we went camping and we went canoeing and we did all kinds of fun stuff. And so I stayed in that youth group for years, even though I had no religious conviction or faith. And if someone had said to me, you know, why are you in this if you don't believe in, like, if you don't accept Jesus as your personal savior, if you're not really sure, you don't really care that much, I probably would have said, well, because I want to go to the baseball games, and I want to go camping with my friends, and I want to do all these, you know, fun things. So I think that sometimes people stay in communities because they have become a part of the community in ways that feels really good for them.
So yeah, like they almost look at it like you're attacking their friend or their cohort, so that, you know, that's why you kind of, most people who do criticize them become an enemy, I guess would make sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that because like when we, for example, criticize people in the Flat Earth community, then we become part of the machine. Like we become part of the deception, mind control machine, because we are just acting out the like lies that we've been fed, and we're just acting out the propaganda that we've been given.
So I guess really, at that point, because I always look at it, I had this weird, naive thought process that if I could show everyone, like, hey, this guy's the one posting the Q post, and he's just a guy who's never been, you know, he doesn't have any secret knowledge. I always looked at it like people would say, oh my goodness, I'm done with this. But, you know, when it didn't happen for you know, 10 or 20,000 people, I wasn't shocked, but I was just like, yeah, I figured. But now I can kind of relate with them. Even I can almost see how anytime someone's criticizing, these guys get really nasty. So I don't think it's an excuse for the behavior, but it at least lets us understand, because I know I fight for the people I love in a very intense way, and maybe they somehow mix those different motivations, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that if we want to impact someone, I think we have to know what their entry point was in terms of why, and what motivators are keeping them in that belief system and community. For example, so if someone's in it for kind of emotional reasons, and I'm not saying that as a negative thing, but if someone's in the community because it feels good to be in the community, then there's probably no information you can give them that would dissuade them, from the belief system that comes along with that community, or at least being in the community. You would need to replace that need that's being met by being in the community with another community or another situation that would allow them to meet that same need. So, for example, I have a friend who I'm talking to about doing research on conspiratorial thinking, and so one thing that we could do is we could say, okay, so when you put people in a state of feeling uncertain and loss of control, they tend to endorse conspiracy theories to a higher degree. So if we took a group of people and did that, and we took a different group of people none of whom necessarily believe in conspiracy theories, and we did something that, like, we maybe restored a sense of control, like we gave them an extra feeling of control, or like an extra feeling of certainty, what you'd probably see is that they would endorse conspiracy theories to a lesser degree than the other group. Yeah, because you're filling that need for them that would create.
I always thought that. I was like, why when there's so many communities out there, and I can conversate with a lot of different communities, and I do, and there's so many out there, it does kind of make me wonder what the hang up is, because I have pictures of the curve of the earth. I've got pictures of a bridge that is on Lake Pontchartrain. It's kind of a famous picture now, but you can see the curve. It's just, you can look with your eyes, and it's so long that you can see it. So I that in contrast, not even from straight on, like from the side, you can see the damn thing. So it's like, I would expect maybe that if they are in the conspiracy for the community side, that they would just, there's so many different communities, what would be the hang up? I know maybe it's person to person though.
Right. And I mean, I guess the other thing is, because some people, like, I don't, it's hard to know for sure all the inner experience of someone who's talking about their flat earth beliefs. But I suspect that there are some people who get into their entry point into the flat earth community, or QAnon, or whatever conspiracy, is that they see things that don't make sense to them, and given the mainstream explanations, and they either don't understand they don't understand the way things work well enough to be able to explain it. And so explanation that comes along is like, oh, well, that makes sense. Like, okay, so I am seeing the world is flat because it is flat. Like, I'm not feeling any motion for the earth because there is no motion, and so I think we have to, like, sometimes we might have to not just show them an observation like the Lake Pontchartrain picture, and I know exactly what I'm talking about, but also help them understand why that's evidence for curved earth, because you'll get flat earthers coming back responding to that and saying, like, oh, well, that's perspective, and that's atmospheric distortion, and things can look curved that aren't actually curved when you view that object in certain conditions. And so then you couldn't just show them that picture. You'd have to go on a journey, a process with them to explore whether what they're invoking to explain it is adequate. So I'll give you a good example. So Red's Rhetoric, do you know who Red's Rhetoric is?
Oh yeah, I love the channel.
Okay, yeah. So he put out this video. I think he's down in Florida, right? Mm-hmm. So he put out a video of a boat, going over the curve, a sailboat sailing far enough away that it disappeared over the curve. And then Jaron on his channel did this analysis of it where he showed, and it was interesting. I mean, so he, like, it was actually kind of clever what he did to some degree, and it was actually kind of cool. So he showed that when the boat got far enough away that there was a mirage happening, and you could see that because you'd see a seagull like fly, and it would fly down towards the water, and it would disappear, and then as it was coming back up, you'd see like a mirror image of it on the like in the air. And so he was basically kind of showed that like, look, there's like a layer of mirage that covers up the bottom of the boat. So when you combine that with perspective, that's why the boat's disappearing, because it's getting small enough. Like, right, perspective lets us know that as things get farther and farther away, they take up less and less space or room in our visual field, and so they will get smaller and smaller. And if it's a flat surface, they should just disappear. There's no reason, like, perspective does not explain why it should disappear from the bottom up as it gets farther and farther away. But if you combine perspective with this mirage, then you can ostensibly explain it. But there are but you'd have to take that person and sit down with them and walk them through, like, okay, can you if you combine perspective and atmospheric distortion, can you explain all observations of ships disappearing from the bottom up completely? No, you can't, because mirages only happen in certain conditions, and boats disappear over the horizon conditions from the bottom up systematically, and they will disappear. If you look at them, they tend to disappear they disappear quicker vertically than horizontally, so to speak, right? And perspective tells us that they should disappear and shrink at the same rates in, both directions. But you'd have to sit down with someone and like explore that with them, and maybe they're not willing to. It's so even people who are in it because they've come across information that doesn't make sense to them, like they say, okay, well, it doesn't make sense to me, like that a vacuum can exist next to a non-vacuum. Like, I don't think the atmosphere can exist without a dome because of entropy, because of the second law of thermodynamics. Like, the air would just get sucked out into space. Like, how does that make sense? So they're seeing things that don't make sense to them, and maybe they're coming across some kind of explanation that like, oh, this makes sense, and so they're going with that. And so maybe it's not like an issue of them meeting some basic human need, but they're just trying to make sense of the information that they're getting. Comes along someone who can help them make sense of that, but they don't have the understanding that they would need to discount that. So, for example, do you mind if do you have a thought, or do you mind if I go into an example? Okay,
no, go ahead.
So here's a good example, I think, for the flat Earth belief system. So I hear a lot of flat earthers say, I don't see curve, I don't feel motion. So how can they possibly exist? And so what they don't, I don't expect them to have the understanding that I do of the way our nervous system works, right? Because I spent 7 years in graduate school understanding the way our nervous system works. And so they don't understand that our sensory system is not necessarily sensitive enough to detect motion on a planet this size. It's not sensitive enough to detect curvature with the naked eye on a planet this large. So just because you don't experience motion, just because you don't see curvature with the naked eye, it's not there. Just like when we're driving in a car, if we're on a really smooth road and we're maintaining the same speed, you're not going to feel the motion. Like, you may see motion, and if you put the window down, you'll feel the motion, like on your skin, but you're not feeling the motion kind of in your body. The only time you feel the motion is when you accelerate or decelerate, or you hit a speed bump and you kind of go up and down, and you feel motion then. But that's because there's a change in velocity. So we know what it's like to be in motion but not feel the motion, like, in our body. And I don't expect people to have that level of understanding of how our sensory systems work, and to also understand that, our system is wired for survival. That's our sensory system's job, is to help us continue to exist. So, for example, there's research showing that if you have people look at a computer screen and they watch a dot moving across the screen and it disappears, they will see it disappear ahead of where it actually disappears, because their visual system deals with information in that it kind of has that expectancy built into it. So it will see what we expect to some degree. Like, it's not a huge difference, but there's enough of a difference that suggests that that's not an error in our visual system. That's our visual system trying to anticipate what's going to happen. And if we think about like a cheetah hunting a gazelle, if it can see where the gazelle is probably going to be, then it might be more likely to catch that gazelle and live another day. But I don't expect people in the flat earth community, unless they've been trained in psychology, to have that level of understanding. So I think, just back to your original thought, I think if you want to have an impact, it can be tough to do it at a community level, because people in that community have different needs, and they're in it for different reasons. And so the people who are in it for kind of more emotional reasons, then that's where you have to like meet them. And then people who are in it because of evidence, and because they've come across evidence that they think debunks the mainstream scientific model, and they think there's evidence for a flat earth, a flat stationary earth, then you have to dialogue with them around the information. Like, what's the data that they're looking at as evidence for a flat stationary earth? Like, are they interpreting everything? Like, are they interpreting the experiments they're looking at in a way that's accurate, that allows them to come to those conclusions? And so it can be tough to, I think, to target a movement at a group level, because people are in it for different reasons. And I'm sure there are people in the community who are in it because they believe that they've come across data that they think point to that belief system, and they're not necessarily in it because of the community, or because because they view the world through that conspiratorial lens. I do think that there are people and maybe also in QAnon. I mean, maybe those people have already left, since like people have done like the work that you're doing to kind of help people understand that it's not what they think it is. But I'm sure there are people in the flat earth community who are in it because they believe there's good evidence, for that position.
Yeah, excellent. It does help me out. I think I'm taking the right step. I'm not necessarily hitting it on a community wide basis, and I'm trying to make it as individual as possible. So I think I'm right with you with that. Okay, so we've been going for 2 hours, and I know the audience has been giving me questions, and I've been keeping up with them. So I've got a few questions written down, and I've got a few things, like I wanted to ask you about Jaren's Mirage, and then I got a couple things I wanted to ask you about. So we'll go ahead and take another 30 seconds really quick. Are you still good for like another 10 or 20 minutes or so? Are you still okay with that?
Yeah. All
right. Well, all right. So I'm going to mute out our mics and give us about a 30-second window, just like we did before. And I want to thank everybody for hanging. What Con says, just for background info regarding my question, I met before his demise accident. Okay, and I've got your question written down, Con. Don't worry. I want to make sure I got his name right really quick. It was Dr. Donald D. Ewan. Okay. Well, I will definitely get that in there. So, guys, viewers, thank you for watching. We're going to end this out pretty soon. But before we do, we're going to take about 30 seconds. We're going to, I'm going to grab like another little sip of something, and I might take a piss or something, who knows. About 30 seconds to a minute. I want to thank all of you for hanging out. It's been a long show, and you guys are hardcore, and I appreciate you. I've learned a lot. I like doing these conversations myself. It helps me reset back to understanding that there probably are many more reasons why people believe in it than just facts. And we know that. But it's hard to see that when you're making videos. But I'm going to go ahead and get going with the little tiny 30-second break, and we'll get your questions asked. If you like my show, if you like what I do, I make comedic videos, I do tutorials, I do all kinds of stuff. I just try to make content all day. Consider a PayPal donation, www.paypal.me/UNIRock. If you'd like your name put on the brick wall, you'll get it. If you want to suggest a topic, you can get it. But as I say every time I mention the pay link, if you're going to donate to a YouTuber, make sure they've been on the platform for a long time. They're going to give you some content for your donation. And make sure you're taking care of yourself first. We will keep going even if we get 0 donations a night. No worries. Okay, here we go. We'll be back in about 30 seconds to a minute. Don't go anywhere. Here we go. turn back down. I got us unmuted here. So, let's see here. Let me get my list up. We got Dr. Mathew Hunsinger with us. Hey, and I just want to make sure I thank you one more time. It's been an excellent conversation, and I'd love to get you back again. I hope you will come back in the future.
I'd love to come back. Yeah, it's been fun.
And hopefully when I get you back, I like coming up, after the first time I talk to someone, I like coming up with ideas for like the next show, like a certain video, a certain concept, and get people in, past guests in to talk about stuff like that. So it'd be really cool.
Cool.
For one example, like if Jaron was to do what you said earlier with Red's Rhetoric, you mentioned the Mirage, right? That would be really cool. Like, let's say a week goes by, a couple weeks, Jaron does there's a situation like that. I'd like to get us together to talk about it, because when Jaron did his response to that Mirage, it was kind of obvious to me, and I started watching Jaron when I started YouTube. Maybe 3 years ago, because I had a guy who another channel that I hung out with sometimes, and he was a flat earther, and he talked to Jaron. But back then, I thought, as I watched Jaron for like another year, I really did, and I am convinced, I think Jaron does believe in the globe right now. And I say that too much, but I think it because I've seen him stare directly at proof of the globe. And do very good experiments that show the globe so many times that I just can't. Just like the Mirage, he's looking down this boat disappearing from the bottom up, and yeah, there is a little bird flying and it disappears. It comes back into view, but you can still see the boat disappear from the bottom up regardless. So, I just have that thought about Jaron, that he's blocking. He's like either purposely or accidentally making sure he keeps believing in the flat earth. And he does have a big monetary investment. His Patreon's at like almost $2,000 a month alone. So it's just my opinion. I just had to get that in there. I'm sorry to inject that, but
no, I mean, I think that's a reasonable observation. I mean, that's the thing, is he does have an investment in this. And if he's walked away from I don't know what his career was before he became a professional YouTuber, but he walked away from his career and his income, his shared income. I believe I don't know what his like relationship status is, but if he's sharing an income with someone else, he is contributing to that income, right? And well, I mean, assuming that's his kitchen, did you see the video he did?
Oh,
yeah. Nice kitchen.
Very nice kitchen.
I wish my kitchen was that nice.
That's what I said.
So, I have no idea like what his situation is financially, or, what his life looks like, what his lifestyle looks like. But yeah, like he has something to lose by losing his channel. And so I think it's reasonable to ask, to what degree does he genuinely believe the earth is flat and stationary? And if he started moving back towards believing in a globe earth, would he act on that? Would he go to his YouTube channel and say, I was wrong? I'm not a flat earther. I don't know. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd keep on making videos.
I mean, it would be a damn hell of a thing to give up, $4,000, $5,000 a month for that's a nice income like that. Just for changing your idea about something. And that's one thing that that's one reason that goes right in to the next question. Well, there's two more. I'll go with this one. How long do you think that the flat earth will last in a big capacity, and it's pretty big right now on YouTube? How long do you think it'll go on in a big capacity, and will it ever end? That was a question.
Right. Well, it's a good question. So a part of me, because that's something I reflected on, I thought, okay, what's going to stop this movement is commercial space flights. So when it is inexpensive enough that a middle income person can get on a ship and fly into space, and maybe they go to the moon, or maybe they, maybe take a trip to the moon, or maybe they just go into, the orbit of the Earth. And I'm thinking, okay, part of me is like, well, that'll do it, because some wealthy flat earther will just, like finance a trip for however many people in the community, and get a ride for them up into space so they can see. And I think it will depend whether that will actually do it. And I think it's gonna be hard to make a big dent in the community until that happens. Like, I think until that happens, there'll be people maybe trickling out of the community, but people maybe trickling in. I don't know if we're going to see like a substantial change in the size, because, and I say that because we have, I mean, if everything that we have available doesn't convince them, then I don't know what will, other than a commercial space flight. But yeah, and I think at that point, it's still how many of the people leave the community, I think, will come down to the reasons why they're in it. Because if it is like, if a person is truly, if they're mainly driven by truth seeking, and that is, and it's argument of information, and that is what's most important, then they will go up in that spaceship, that shuttle, see a spherical Earth, and they'll say, all right, that's it, I'm done. Like, I'm not a flat earther. But someone who is in it for emotional reasons, someone who's in it because, they want to be in the community, they gain benefits, or their worldview is just, it would just be shaken too much. Like, if they're the kind of person who feels like, I don't know that I could experience my existence as meaningful if I knew the Earth is actually a sphere. Because does that mean that evolution's true and the Big Bang Theory is true? And maybe that would just be too distressing, for them to think about that. So I suspect that those people and people who have created like a non-falsifiable version of their belief system will still believe it, because again, going back to this non-falsifiable thing, if someone could do something like, say, like, well, the ship wasn't made by a flat earther, so how do I know that there's not a holographic image being displayed onto the screen? Or how do I know that they didn't make the like windows in such a way that it makes the Earth look curved, right? I mean, yeah. How do we know that we actually left the Earth? Like, how do we know we didn't just like fly, around a little bit, and then they tell us like, oh, look through your window, but it's actually a projection of some kind of a video. They could come up with, reasons to dismiss, right? If they really want to, they could do that. Oh, yeah. And if it's like, oh, well, it's a flat earther who can afford, he's a millionaire or billionaire. Well, then they could say, well, they're actually not a flat earther, like they're a shill. Oh, they're undercut. So again, like, just if someone wants to hang on to a belief, then they can find ways to do that.
For sure. And then also, there have been some, like, that's a lot of people get mad at me because, I do shows on mysteries and conspiracies, and they're like, why can't you believe in the flat Earth? I've literally been asked that by so many different people. And there's so much good evidence out there that you really do have to disconnect from reality to not, that you collect. There's things you can do, and you got to kind of disconnect from reality for it. So I don't know. I think that, yes, you make a great point. That whole thing about the space flight, I think that what we'll see is everything that happens that helps demonstrate, like, the future moon landings that are going to happen soon. I hear they're doing it again. And then, people being able to fly up over the Earth soon, and, all these different commercial things. They're just going to take a dent, I think. That's my opinion, in the community as they go. Okay. We've got some other ones. Let me hit these. I'm going to try to hit the more specific questions in a second, guys. I'm not skipping any of your stuff. Fletcher, let me go ahead and say this. Okay, oh, yeah, that's Fletcher. That's a great freaking question, dude. Holy shit. And Joelbot, you asked a really good question, too, and I got that written down, Joelbot. I'll go to yours in a minute.
I'm excited.
Okay, so, yeah, Joelbot got a great one. Fletcher just asked, what do you think about flat earthers? And if you can, let's try to just bounce through these because I've got a bunch of them. What do you think about flat earthers teaching their kids flat earth? What do you personally think?
It's disconcerting to me. It's disconcerting to me because that child is likely to have to deal with stigma, social stigma, and not only that, but I mean, look, it's natural for parents to teach their kids what they believe, but I think that, I mean, I don't think we live on a flat, stationary Earth. So that's what I'm going to impart to my future child. But I mean, so I think one thing is, what will be the response from their peers, and then the other thing is, you're setting them up to have to unlearn information. I mean, but I guess, if a flat earther were to say, okay, I'm going to teach kids to be critical thinkers and to be curious and exploratory and to try and be aware of the reasoning and inquiry process, and to say, this is what we believe, but you need to figure out for yourself what you think is true. Like, I guess I'd be okay with that if a parent kind of took that approach. But if a parent's telling their kids the Earth is flat, those people who believe it's a globe are idiots, well, I feel like they're doing the very thing that they're criticizing us for doing.
Yeah.
So they're not doing anything different than the very thing they're trying to counter. So
yeah, I'm with you completely. And I know we're all people, and I make mistakes too sometimes. And I'm glad I've had tonight, because it'll help me kind of get back on track with maybe not looking at someone as a flat earther because they are mentally deficient or stupid or something. I think that'll be the talk I've had tonight has helped me move on to understand that there's a lot more at play than just little things like that. So okay, so Joelbot's question. Yes. Let me just scroll back up to it, because I wrote down like an assumption, and I want to get a little sum up, and I want to get all of it. What are your thoughts about conspiracies that play off of mental illness, like, for example, targeted individuals and like paranoia-based conspiracies? And what do you think about the danger of creating an echo chamber to enable each other to propel that conspiracy further? What is your opinion there?
Right. Yeah, so those are good questions. I'll do the echo chamber first. So yeah, I think that one thing that technology does for us, unfortunately, is it makes it easier to be in an echo chamber and to create echo chambers. So I think that, if people are invested in a community and in a belief system that is constantly under threat because of, information coming at them from the mainstream, then it can probably be pretty easy for that community to become kind of insulated, and isolate themselves. And it may be more likely that they're going to be in an echo chamber. So an echo chamber is never, I don't think they're ever helpful. For example, I am definitely identify as liberal progressive, but I listen to the Ben Shapiro show, which is a conservative podcast, and he's pretty darn conservative. And there are many times that I just disagree with him, but I make myself listen to it, because I think it's important to force ourselves to kind of, listen to as many perspectives as possible. So I think that everyone's susceptible to being in an echo chamber. I don't think they're any more. No, I think that maybe they are more vulnerable to being an echo chamber because of that kind of constant threat coming at them from the mainstream. But I have no data to back that up. It's just my suspicion.
It's you could kind of take an observation of it. It does seem that way.
Right. I think it's a reasonable conclusion, hypothesis. As far as the mental illness thing, is this person, is he or she asking more about people who have mental illness being taken advantage of, or that?
Yeah. Well, there's a conspiracy out there that it basically there are some people out there that obviously have paranoid delusions, that people are coming after them, and now there has probably because of that, people have formed a conspiracy that they are specifically targeted, and then other people are doing what there are a lot of people that try to use that conspiracy and mix it with their conspiracy theories so that they attract those individuals that believe this stuff. So yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that, I actually just read a research article relates to this. So, I'm sure there are all of these communities that either are kind of grounded in some kind of conspiracy happening, or at least conspiracy is part of it. Like where QAnon maybe is, the conspiracy is the main driving force of the belief system, whereas flat Earth is like, you get to the flat Earth, it's like you kind of have to get there through the conspiracy, but it's not necessarily the main thrust of it. So I'm sure there are people in all these communities who have mental illness, who have what we call a psychotic disorder of some kind, schizophrenia or other disorders that fall into that category, that have paranoid delusions, and those paranoid delusions are being impacted by the conspiracies within the community. But the data we have suggests that most of the people in these communities are not. We're not talking about kind of clinical level paranoia. Like there's a study that I just read recently where they actually found that when they looked at kind of what constitutes paranoia, like clinically, and then what people tend to endorse who are conspiracy theorists, are not the same thing. So people who are paranoid, in terms of having paranoid delusions, tend to say, well, everyone to get me as an individual. Whereas conspiratorial thinking tends to be that there are a small group of people out there who are impacting all of us negatively. So somebody who's paranoid in terms of having mental illness is going to tend to focus on themselves. And the paranoia is really more focused on the self, that people are after them individually. And conspiratorial thinking tends to be more about small groups of people impacting the general public in negative ways, or pockets of people within the general public. So I hope that answers that person's question.
No, that was great. Yeah. Okay. This is a hard question to vocalize, so I'm going to try my best for you, buddy. But somebody asked about the hierarchy of needs above survival, and do any overlap? And I might have wrote it down wrong, and if I did say it wrong, you could retype your question. But that was all I wrote down, so I'm not sure if I got that wrong.
So I think what the person's referring to is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and what Maslow proposed is that you can kind of think of it as a pyramid. So at the bottom you have survival needs, then you have kind of more basic psychological needs, and then kind of the highest, the top of the pyramid is what he called self-actualization. And the idea is that we tend to hang out. We make sure the needs at every kind of lower level met before we move on to the higher level. So someone who's homeless is probably not concerned with their philosophical commitments. Like, what commitments do they have, am I with this philosophical camp or that philosophical camp? Like, what would I like to pursue, with my time? Like, maybe I could play an instrument. Like, they're not that. They're at the bottom rung of that pyramid saying, how can I stay warm? How can I get food? Where can I go to the bathroom? And how can I not get mugged or killed? Right. So that's where they are. Whereas once your basic safety needs are taken care of, then you're going to move up to the next rung. And that's true, but we also can see clear instances in which we don't always kind of move in that same linear fashion. So for example, people in our military, by the way, thank you to the people in our military who put their lives in danger for all of us. So those people, are putting their safety needs below kind of higher order needs, like needs that are more abstract, like a feeling of like, I am doing what I'm supposed to do in this world. Like, I am keeping people safe. Like, I'm protecting like freedom and liberty and, people's ability to pursue whatever they want to pursue. Like, those are higher on the pyramid than the basic survival needs. But yet soldiers will kind of put those higher needs first. So generally we start at the bottom, we work our way up, but not always. So hopefully that answers the question.
Oh, no, yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I'm actually going to have to end... Okay, I'm going to have to end out myself. I've got to do a couple things anyway.
Cool. Can I say one last thing? like one quick thing?
No, please. Yeah, we'll take about 5 minutes to end. So,
I just wanted to, like, I don't know how many of your listeners are part of the Flat Earth, or people in the Flat Earth community kind of drop in to listen. But I guess I just want to say to those people who are, in the Flat Earth community and the QAnon community, that I encourage you to just reflect on, why am I in this community? Like, what needs does this community meet? And to be aware of your reasoning, thought process, and your process of inquiry. And just to, not that, like, I would never tell someone they have to believe anything in particular, but I would encourage anyone and everyone to just be reflective, and to ask themselves, like, what is it that I am getting out of this? And to evaluate, is there a cost? Is that cost worth it? If it's about being part of a community, for example, is there a different way I could get this need met without the cost? If that person's experiencing a cost for being, for example, part of the Flat Earth community. So I just wanted to put that out there to anyone who's listening who is, part of the community.
Definitely, and I appreciate it very much. I've had a great talk with you. I didn't even get to hit a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about, and we had a nice long stream, so love to have you back soon. We'll definitely be in touch. Man, I wish I had like a way to send people to your YouTube and stuff. I'm not used to that, but maybe in the future you'll make one, because I think people would love to watch your videos and stuff. So.
Oh, thank you. I will consider it. But yeah, it's great being on your show, and we can definitely have a part 2. So yeah, I will talk to you soon.
All right, man. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too. All right, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end this out. I really had a great stream. My mind is completely full right now, and I'm just processing it. I'd love to talk to him longer, but I have some obligations I got to hit. Got stuff I got to finish up for the night. We will be doing an after show on the UNIRock archive. It's my third channel. It's my smaller channel for like after shows, longer streams. If you like what I do, please consider a PayPal donation at www.paypal.me/UNIRock. What do we do? I make videos, edited videos. I write out presentations and I make them into edited videos. But I also stream at night so that I can kind of provide spend some time with you guys. And then now that the show's been going and people started coming to the show and watching it, we're trying to get more guests in. We're trying to have discussions. We're going to get a Flat Earther in soon. And maybe I can hook up a panel when the Flat Earther comes in. But it's hard because I had a Flat Earther I wanted to talk to, but the guy kind of had a breakdown on me. So, like, he got mad at me. So, we'll see if I can find a Flat Earther who is able to just sit down and conversate without, and no converting, nothing like that. I just want to understand people. And the whole thing about the community part, do we see a lot of people? I guess what I could take away from the conversation, do we see a lot of people believing in these types of movements because of the need for community? Well, yeah. And it explains a lot. It's so baffling to me, right? When you guys came to me, well, 3 years ago, when my older subscribers came to me and said, hey, this is a conspiracy you have to believe in. There's too much evidence. I wanted to. Does that sound weird? I wanted to because, like, they were convinced. They were passionate. But I can't lie to you guys. I can't sit here and say, like, I believe in the Flat Earth when I don't. So I've continually said that at first I even considered it. I believed that boats didn't disappear until I searched it. But I guess that's the thing I did different, right? When it comes to Flat Earth, that's the thing I did different. I didn't just take their word. I went and actually found out if they do. And I looked up every point they made that I thought affected me. I searched the counterpoint right away. So if I hadn't have searched the counterpoints right away, would things have been different for me? It's highly possible. Maybe. But I know one thing. I'm not that type of guy. I'm not the type of guy who believes something because other people tell me to. I'm the type of guy that needs evidence, and you know that by now. I can't even believe I have this many people that come back and watch my show regularly because, like, a lot of people get angry with me. Oh, you believe in conspiracy theories, but you don't believe in that one and that one and that one, And the whole truth is, I just believe what there's evidence for. Because when you start to step further than that, you can't argue by definition that you're actually not following facts, that you are founding that on a belief. When the facts stop and you keep going, that's belief after that, right? Nothing wrong with belief, by the way. Nothing wrong with it. Okay, guys, thank you so much. If I missed any of your questions, I'll get them the next time he comes back. I apologize for being a little bit, my mind being a little full at the end of this, but I'm really glad it is. And I got two things to say. Oh my God, I almost forgot. One, the other day when I was describing another YouTuber, I made the statement that he was a liberal SJW, and I said it in kind of a negative way. I didn't mean that by the liberal part that he was negative, because I know that there are many different kinds of liberals, and it's a whole idea. It's not just this thing that we see on the media from certain people that's pushed in our faces a lot. The part that I kind of was being more derogatory with was SJW. And I just want to make sure you understand that. If you want to get mad at me for saying that about SJWs, it's just the way I feel, and I'm sorry. That's how I feel. But some people took it as if I was insulting someone for being a liberal, and I was not. And I apologize if it sounded like that. But here's one thing I want to thank you guys for. Thank you for actually asking me. Thank you for actually coming to me and saying, hey, am I taking this wrong? Or are you saying that liberals are bad? Or are you just saying this? And I'm glad you guys come to me, okay? When you're live and you're talking, sure, I mean, you guys could walk away thinking something completely different. You could think that I'm hating on someone that I'm not. You could think I'm being mean to someone that I'm not. And I know I'd come to you, and if you did ask me a question, or if I make assumptions on your guys' statements in the chat, I always try to apologize. I always try to hear you out and really understand what you're asking and what you're saying. So I'm glad that there's a big majority of you that also do that with me. Okay. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Akan. I'll get your question next time. Honestly, I've got people that I have to go outside and talk to, and I have to do some real-life things, too. I have family and stuff, so I'm sorry. Family members that I need to talk to, and they've been waiting for a while, so I hate doing that. Okay, I got to go. Like I said, join the channel next to the subscribe button. It helps me. The donations to PayPal, joining the channel, it helps me do this. But if you can't afford it, no hate. We'll keep going. It would really help right now, and I don't ask a lot. A lot of times I do shows, and I never mention it. But if you can, it would really help. All right. Thank you for watching. You guys are so freaking awesome. This has been a great show. I'm going to be clipping it. I'm going to be putting out clips of this show. Thank you, and meet me on Bizzy's UNIRock archive in just a few minutes.